Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I am Gabby Plum of Sensual Seniors, and today I'm talking with Tim Hopkins, a very old friend and my first Tantra teacher. I hope you will enjoy everything he has to say, including all the enlightening things about getting to know yourself as a man. Tim, I think if I can hear correctly, you have got a little English accent there. Is that right?
Yeah, I grew up in the UK many years ago, and yeah, look, I've been in Australia probably about 30 years, and I grew up in the traditional English family over there. It's like the community, we didn't have much really communication around a lot of stuff. I didn't learn from a young age about how to articulate my feelings properly. I didn't have any. I had a lot of shame around sexuality because in the UK, it's not. It's just not really talked about. There's no such thing as. There's not much education, especially when you're growing up. I think as far as sex education in school, we were shown how to put a condom on a banana, which it's not it's not really very, it wasn't very thorough. And I'm sure it's probably different nowadays, but it wasn't when I was growing up.
Yes, the banana is not very representative, really, is it? Even though I suppose if one can imagine doing that and peeling the little condom around over the banana, it does give a bit of an understanding, but the condoms, to my recollection, and please correct me if I'm wrong, condoms come in all sorts of sizes and shapes and colors and things like that, but I'd be fairly sure then it would not have been something that would have been told to children that there are lots of different types and things and that they should learn in other ways. So when you say you didn't have the communication in your family home, was that because your mother or your father did not discuss sex at all, or did discuss personal things at all?
It wasn't. It just wasn't talked about. Yeah, just I never had that talk, from your parents. So, and I think, you're basically a product of your parents, really. You're like a little recording machine when you're young. So a lot of your beliefs and your mannerisms and the way you relate to others really is like downloaded from your parents in my sort of experience anyway. And my dad, I mean, I love my dad, but he wasn't really good at expressing his feelings and stuff, as a lot of men aren't.
No.
And so, I used to just cram a lot of stuff down. And what I've learned through trainings I've done now and getting to know myself better is, feelings are there to be expressed. They're nothing to be afraid of. It's just that they have to be expressed in the moment, because if they're not, and if you push them down, they can create sort of tension in your body and sort of blockages around your natural flow of your life force, if you like.
Look, that's absolutely true. I remember my mother said to me that this is the only piece of sexual advice she gave me. She said, sex is a messy business, avoid it. Well, I understand what she means about it being a messy business. It can be, but that can be fun too. But it's not an education, is it? And when that's all you get, then you're left to have to find out on your own. And I can remember at school being totally curious and going to libraries and wanting to look up pictures of girls breasts, for instance. I didn't know what my sexuality leaning was at the time. What did a breast look like? Because it certainly didn't look like anything I had on my chest at the time, which was a couple of pinpricks, bee stings. And so I had to do that. Although I remember that I could not look up pictures of penises. So I never knew what a penis looked like until I encountered one much later. Were you taught about girls? Were you taught about anything about girls and what they did and what they were like?
Only like through my own exploration, really. I mean, there was a little bit of pornography around in those days, you know what I mean? And which is not really the best way to learn, pornography and magazines that I found that my dad had. It's not the best way to learn because it's not really true to life. You know what I mean? A lot of that stuff. And the worrying thing is today is I think a lot of kids, learn, because porn's so available. There's nothing wrong with porn as such, but it's just, there's so much of it around and it's not really the best way to learn your early sexuality and relating to others in that way.
It's not realistic, is it? You said your father had the porn magazines. Was your mother aware of that?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Like some of them were kept in strange places, so maybe not. Yeah, maybe
Yes.
not.
I know that situation extremely well. So tell me, what brought you then eventually to Australia? Were you trained as an electrician, is that right?
Yeah, that's what
did you train in England or did you train in Australia when you got here?
I did an apprenticeship in England. The thing about living in England, I never liked the cold. You grow up with it, but I used to hate the cold.
Yeah.
And then when I experienced, I think the first time I went overseas, I went to Spain, as a lot of English people do.
Indeed.
And I suddenly realized there's warmer climates to live and very different places to live. I love England now. I love going back there, but I couldn't live there anymore. It's just the winters are so long, grey, cold.
I remember my birthday's in September, and I remember that you could have, maybe once in a while you could have a half reasonable summer. And then at the end of August, there was a sense of doom as the wind started to blow cold. And I can remember my birthday always heralded miserable weather. Even if we had an Indian summer, you knew that miserable weather was going to come afterwards.
Yeah, it's inevitable. I mean, don't get me wrong, you get beautiful days in the winter as well. Those really crisp blue sky days when the frost's on the ground. I mean, it's beautiful as well. It's just the physicality of cold. I never did like it.
No, me neither.
So what brought me here was, I guess I became really curious I was around early 20s and just curious about other places. And I was in a fairly long-term relationship, excuse me, and that I was really struggling with. And just because I just was struggling and I couldn't express my feelings properly. It was just a challenging time for me. And in a way, leaving England was a little bit of an escape. It's just that this chance came up. The reason I left to come to Australia was my stepbrother was actually born in Australia. It's a long story, but he was actually coming back over to spend some time with his dad, which wasn't my dad. And he said, "Why, look, you're looking at settling down, you're in a relationship. Why don't you come over to Australia and meet my dad and have a look around, just for a month or 6 weeks or so." And so I just took that opportunity. And and I never looked back. I mean, we went to Thailand, which was a bit of an eye opener on the way, and then Australia, and it was just so different, and I just fell in love with the place, and it was warm, and we travelled up north to the tropics, and
Mm.
I fell in love with that, you know, tropical sort of environment as well, and so to cut a long story short, I was I never went back after 6 weeks or so. I didn't go back for over a year, and the relationship held out for a long while, but then it just petered away because I didn't put any energy into it,
No.
and really, yeah, I was struggling with it anyway. I I was struggling with relating in my 20s in all areas of my life, really.
And do you put that down to not having been able to relate with your parents, or not having had a relationship with, say, a woman who was good at relating, or was she any good? I mean, it seems to me that so many relationships, they flounder around in the dark because they don't know how to bring out the best from their partner. They don't know how to converse without judgment. They don't know how necessarily to start a conversation, which doesn't start with, well, you did this, but to start in a way that says, listen, something is not working for me, and I'd like to discuss it if you would be willing, rather than, it's the old story of, it's not you, darling, it's me. But it is that, but it's how you present that within a relationship so that it doesn't go completely haywire in the very beginning. But ultimately, I think if communication is something that is absolutely essential to maintaining a good relationship with anybody, then I would understand if your investigations into your sexuality later, once you got to Australia, would have helped that. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. Like you hit the nail on the head. Communication it's central to everything in your life, really. Openly discussing things, and having those real conversations with people, really being authentic about what's going on for you as well.
Do you, Tim, here's something that I've found very, very difficult, and I wonder whether you would agree with me here. The sense of one's authentic self. How does one find that? Because I've struggled with it for years.
Took me a while.
How do you find that authentic self? Do you do you sort of experiment and think, well, am I this? Am I that? Who am I? No idea. How do you find that? Because I think this is a crucial aspect of what I suppose I'm doing with Central Senior, which is the idea of encouraging, I suppose it is women in particular, of a certain age, maybe who've never been able to discuss their sexuality with anybody, to be able to say, well, this is what I am, this is who I am, this is what I'm feeling, and this is what's going on. How do you pull that out of somebody and out of yourself? How do you get there?
I don't think you can pull it out of somebody. We all have to do the work ourselves. You know what I mean? Like for instance, I realised even when I got to Australia, relationships still weren't really working for me. I'd always been a really shy person as a child, and that sort of came up, into adulthood for me as well. And it wasn't until I started looking. I used to blame things on everything that was outside of me. That was the other thing. Instead of like taking a deep look at getting to know myself better, you know what I mean? Like I've come to realize now, the relationship you have with yourself is you've got to have a really good relationship with yourself before you start relating really well with other people. That's what I found. And learning to actually love, yourself on a deep level, which
How do you do
I'd
that?
always struggled.
It's struggle. I've struggled with that all my life. As the adopted child who felt neglected and sent away, I have struggled with that all my life. I'm 72 now, and it's taken me this long to figure out who I am and to recognize that I'm okay. So how does one do that? Where do you go to get that information? Where do you go to learn about that?
Well, I'd come to this place where things weren't working, and I decided I wanted to, I always had a curious mind, and I wanted to investigate that further. So I looked up, I explored all things around relationship, and then got to read stuff around, the relationship with self has to be where you start, really.
Yep.
And learning to accept yourself for who you are. If you really love yourself, like self-judgment was a huge thing for me. I used to worry so much about what other people thought. You know what I mean? And so I was like a chameleon. I could adapt to any situation. So I would come across in a way that I thought that person would like me. And it's not being authentic. Being authentic, like just being comfortable with just being yourself, and whatever that is, and getting to know yourself on a deep level. I met this woman. I was in Sydney for 5 years when I came to Australia. And then I came up to Cairns because I'd always loved the tropics and the tropic environment. And I met this woman that had done some training around a thing called Tantra, which I'd heard of, but I didn't understand what it was about. I mean, the only thing I related Tantra to was you remember Sting, the pop star?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'd heard something about Sting, that Sting was into Tantra and used to have sex for like 8 or 9 hours at a time. and so I thought it just related to sex, and it was some, strange esoteric thing. But it's like Tantra, as I came to learn more about it, Tantra is about all areas of your life. It relates to everything. I think in the Tantra, in all the old Tantra scriptures, it was like a movement a long, long time ago. 5% of the teachings probably related to sexuality. But it complements it so beautifully, because Tantra is about being fully present and conscious and in the moment and fully embodied in everything you're doing in your life. For instance, when you're eating, how often do we, when we're busy and we're working, do we just rush? And you get to the end of your meal and you think, well, I think that was nice, but I can't remember really tasting it properly. Well, Tantra's about being in the moment and just savoring each flavor. And how does that feel in your mouth? If you're having a shower, you're feeling the water on your skin, and how sensual that is, and the smells of the soap, and it comes into all areas of your life. And that's how it relates so beautifully to sexualities, because when you're the partner, if you're fully in the moment, both completely present with each other, and your body and your skin is open, and you're feeling all the sensations, and you slow everything right down. That was a big learning point for me.
Yeah.
Often in sex, it was very hurried. And I was in my head a lot, trying to work things out. And then, and the thoughts were, oh, is she liking this? How am I coming, how going across? And the head is the last place you want to be.
Yeah.
It should, in your body and in the moment and fully with the other person. And then it is possible to like merge with another person. People talk about these experiences where during lovemaking, or not even during, orgasm, but there's a merging of the two people. They're so engrossed in the moment and totally in that experience where it's like your mind drops away and it becomes a whole a whole different experience. It took me a long time to realize that.
How did you get there? How did you get to that point?
Well, I met this lady, like I said, I had a bit of a, we're still friends. The relationship didn't really go very far, but she had done a Tantra training in Melbourne with a Tantra teacher, and she started talking about Tantra and how, beneficial it's been in her life in lots of different areas. So I was very curious and I asked lots of questions. And I got the name of the teacher, and it was a Martina Hughes
Oh,
she was in
yes.
Sydney
Yes.
then.
Yep.
She was based in Sydney, but she moved to Melbourne when I started to work with her. So I went, like, I was terrified, really. Didn't really understand what it was all about. And I looked on a website, and she ran retreats where you got an immersive experience. You could go and learn in an immersive environment. And I thought, well, I don't really know what goes on at these retreats. Is it like a big orgy, or is it all like sexual, or
Yeah.
I was in, just completely in the dark around it. So I looked on a website, and she had a few retreats coming up, and there was a retreat which was aimed mainly at men to get them to become more comfortable around opening up to feelings and relating from a more embodied way. And I thought, well, that sounds the safest place to start. And it just felt really right to me as well. So I signed up for it, and I went to do this retreat, which was in Sydney. And it just, it was an incredible experience. It was, I think sometimes the biggest experience, or in my experience, the biggest experiences for me have been an opening into that, because it's been such a change from what I'm used to. I got so much from that retreat. It was an incredible experience, really talking authentically and openly with other men and sharing where you're at. And also, Martina had some women that were helping her with her on the retreat. You had really good feedback around how you came across as a man and what that actually meant to you.
What sort of ages were the other people? Were they the same sort of age as you? Were they older men, older women? Or?
From 25 probably up until 65.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
It's great to know that people at 65 are still interested in that kind of subject. I'm fascinated by the fact that that is the case. So that's really good.
So this
Martina,
retreat.
do you still see Martina? Do you still go to her retreats?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. She's changed her focus now more on, she used to teach mainly Tantra and Tantric principles, but she's met a man and married. She's got a beautiful relationship now, and he's an incredible teacher in his own right. And now they teach relationship. They teach people how to relate.
That's really good.
To relate. I opened up more than I ever had in my whole life. And that was such a healing experience in itself. I learned principles of like slowing down, in like really deep embodiment, feeling what was going on in my body. I remember when I left, I was down in Sydney, and I remember sitting at the airport. I kept laughing to myself. I was sitting there laughing. I was like in a different world. It's like a whole different world had opened up to me. And I just remember I was sitting there like in a blissful state. And I suddenly realized people were looking at me a bit strange. And I think they thought I was on drugs. And in a way I was, but they were completely natural. I was just such a high after that experience. And honestly, it was a real turning point in my life.
That's
Um,
wonderful.
it was still a big learning journey after that, but it was like a huge turning point in my life.
Sure.
My life completely started to change after that moment.
It's so incredible. I worked with a group called Access Consciousness for a long time. I think I was with them for about 8 or 9 years, and I can remember that experience of opening up and being incredibly vulnerable and
Yeah.
allowing the tears to come in and allowing
Mm.
the screams of the agony of never understanding myself and all of the sort of things that happen when you do that opening up and just being like a complete melted blob on the floor after a bars session, I mean, doing when we ran bars and things, a complete blob on the floor, totally useless. And I remember Gary Douglas saying to people, don't touch her. She's just falling apart, but she needs to fall apart before she can put herself back together again. Yeah.
Nice way, wouldn't it?
Yeah, yeah, it is. And it was like you said, and you're sitting in the airport and you're shaking your head at yourself thinking, who the hell am I now? Who
Yeah.
am I now?
Well, I just knew I was onto something, and I knew I was going to chase that and explore that and learn more about myself. Um, like it's vulnerability is such a scary place to be. I think, especially for men,
Yes,
opening up, being totally authentic, opening up and telling people what's really, what's going on. But
sure.
it's so, it's so valuable in our lives. You know what I mean?
Freeing, isn't it? Yeah.
It's freeing. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
This is what
yeah,
I found with talking, particularly with women and with men, about their sex lives, where they are with their sex lives at the moment or have been, and just the sense that they've been able to talk about it with somebody has allowed them to feel as if a burden has been lifted from their shoulders, that
yeah,
they're
yeah,
carrying around, which in a way is the secrecy of part of their life that they've been carrying around. They've opened a door to it, and that door has allowed some light in and has showed them that the light that comes in has illuminated the fact that everything that they have experienced and done is okay, and none of it is wrong. And for the judgments that may have been thrown at them by other people, they're not real. They're not real.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well,
judgments usually, yeah, they come from the person
take,
who's very often, yeah.
yeah, we take so much on from other people, don't we?
Oh,
And that's a really valuable practice to question your beliefs.
yeah.
Is that really true?
Well, it
Is that
is.
true for me?
It is. In Access, we learned, I mean, I haven't been in Access for 10, 12 years now, but some of the teachings there have stayed with me for a long time. And one of them is when you have this sense of judgment, whether it's judging yourself or even judging somebody else, is to ask the question, well, who does that belong to? And
Yeah,
who have you bought that from? And very often, you've bought it from somebody else, and you've never realized you've taken on somebody else's point of view and made it your own, and it's not yours.
yeah,
Yeah. And so that question is something that I encourage people to ask when they've had judgments about other people or about themselves is, who does that belong to? Where'd you get that from? And it is that,
yeah,
and that can lead to a lightness in yourself as well when you recognize, gosh, that wasn't even mine. I've been operating under that
yeah,
point of view, and
yeah,
that point of view was never even mine. What do we buy from our parents? You think about your father and his porn magazines, they were hidden in places, possibly where he thought his wife didn't know, but I'm
what I
sure
was saying.
yeah. And that happened in situation of mine as well, where that things were kept in a big bag somewhere, and the person thought that they would never be found, but of course they were found. But for them, there was a secrecy around it, and as a result, I created a secrecy around it too. And so, but it wasn't my secrecy; it was somebody else's. So when you start learning that the lightness that comes from losing those judgments is just absolutely, it's magic. That's great. Oh, that's so good, Tim. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when you free yourself from that, that means then you can come to another person. Let's say you're doing a tantric session with somebody, or you do body work, if I remember rightly. Is that right?
I do now. Yeah, I did a lot of courses. I'll go into that
In the
later
next,
because that was on my journey onwards. I learned so much about how embodiment and pleasure and fully feeling our bodies and opening our bodies up in a whole new way
yeah.
can be life changing.
Thank you, Tim, very, very much for some wonderful ideas, thoughts, and information about Tantra and about how to open yourself up to new experiences. And if you'd like to know more about Tantra and about Tim Hopkins, please listen to the next interview, which will be coming out within a week of this one. And also there will be a third one in which we go into some real nitty-gritty of Tantra exercises. So thank you again, and goodbye for now.